When I get close to finishing up a vehicle, I start making lists. It just helps me remember everything that needs to get done. Sometimes I make a list of everything I need to get done, and it's a great big long list. And other times, it's just a list of what I need to get done when the vehicle is in a specific part of the shop. In this case, I got the wagon up on the lift, and I just walked from the rear bumper to the front bumper, looking underneath, and just made a list of everything that has to get done underneath the truck before it comes back down. It just helps me remember everything that I need to finish up, and that way you make sure you don't miss anything when you're working on the vehicle. Now, don't get discouraged, because as you work through your list, you're going to see something that you missed. Just go ahead and write it on the bottom. That way you make sure you don't miss it. When you're finishing up a rig, a list, it'll be your friend. Today is going to be an exciting day because if you remember, we've got a whole bunch of stuff done on this truck, but I haven't driven in it all yet, and that's because I've been waiting on a bunch of parts. So they are all here today. So if everything works out, fingers crossed, we'll get everything inside this truck, and I'll be able to take it for its very first test drive. Woohoo! I'm so excited. I'm going to start today with the shocks. I chose Radflow JK shocks for a couple of reasons. First, I wanted a shock that I could customize the valving in because I know the weight of this wagon is not going to be the same as a Jeep JK. And because these are tunable and rebuildable, I can do that. Plus, I love how well my Radflow shocks work on my Ultra 4 pre-runner, so I'm confident that these are the perfect choice for the wagon. Custom drivetrain means custom drive shafts, and all of my rigs have JE Reel drivelines in them. For the wagon, I'm using their Canyon crawler shafts, both front and rear. The rear is 1350 joint to joint, and the front is 1350 with a heavy-duty CV at the transfer case. And once they're installed, I can nut and bolt this rig front to back. One thing that you always want to check after you've installed your drivelines for the very first time, go ahead and just droop out the suspension. You don't have to use a lift like I have here. You can actually do it on the floor with just some really tall jack stands. But you want to have your suspension fully hung and then check for clearance right here at the transfer case yoke. You want to make sure there's no binding between the yoke and the actual straps that hold the U-joint in. It's one of the reasons why I really like using these JE Reel drivelines. The yokes that they use have a lot of space in them, so if you have a lot of suspension travel, there's always seems to be enough room here. If it is tight, you got a couple choices. You could step up to a larger U-joint. This is 1350. A 1410 would give me a little bit more angle. If this was like an Ultra 4 car, I may even go up to like a 1480. But I am really happy with the clearance that I have right here. We're good to go. I use these full braided lines from Crown Performance pretty much on all of my rigs. I just like them a lot. Number one, super strong. I've actually had them get wrapped up on tree roots on the trail and break a banjo bolt in a caliper, and the line didn't fail. I just had to replace the banjo bolt. Super easy to install, and they look really good. A lot of people ask about if you feel any pedal fade with a full braided line like this and no hard line, and you don't with these, because these are like 5 layers. There's like a Kevlar layer inside, and then another layer, and then the stainless braid layer, and then a protective layer, and then the color layer. So it is just as strong as a steel line, plus looks a lot better. If you have these e-brake rear disc brake conversion calipers, this is a complete kit that I got from Rough Stuff, but it's basically Cadillac Dorado rear disc brake calipers. If you do not adjust these before you bleed the brakes, you will never get a firm pedal. Pedal will always be spongy. And it's easy to tell if they're adjusted or not, because if you can move this caliper e-brake activation arm more than 1/4 of an inch and still turn the tire, then the piston's not out far enough. What you have to do is think of it this way. Inside this caliper, the piston has threads cut into it, and then there's a bolt that goes into it, which is attached to this arm. And when you turn this lever or pull this lever with the e-brake cable, it's basically just turning the piston out, and that's what pushes the pad into the rotor and gives it clamping force. It's not that big of a deal to adjust it. Best way to do it, start by taking the tire off. To adjust the rear brake calipers, it's actually pretty simple. You're gonna remove the emergency brake arm from the back of the caliper, and at the same time, you're gonna apply a little bit of pressure on the pad to push the piston back in the bore. Then you can use a smaller wrench to adjust the rotating mechanism that is inside the piston. What you're after when they're adjusted correctly is for the arm to only move 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch before the brake pads start to contact the rotor. That ensures that you'll have good pedal feel because the piston doesn't have to move really far before it contacts the rotor, and at the same time, your e-brake will work. Last item on the checklist today is to fill all the fluids and bleed the brakes. I'm using the Motive Products Power Fill to fill everything underneath the truck and their brake bleeding pressure bleeder system for the brakes. I love how simple this makes the job, and it also helps keep everything clean. Everything that we did today, yes, it's not glamorous by any means, but it's definitely gonna make this truck work really well when I finally take it out of the shop. I know my plan was to possibly drive it today, but number one, day just got away from me, and number two, I'm gonna enjoy this adult beverage, so there's gonna be no driving after that. But I think that, you know, waiting for all these parts was definitely the right decision. Sure, I could have thrown any old shock underneath this truck that's for a JK because, I mean, it's a JK chassis, but having the tunable rad flows in there is gonna make sure that this truck works perfect when I get it out of the shop and off-road, because I'm gonna be able to custom valve those for the weights of this vehicle. And then aside from that, you know, the full braided crown brake lines along with the diff breathers, installing them all at the same time, so all the lines run perfectly along the frame rail. It's those little things that sometimes make a vehicle really, really good in the long run. And as I've said many times, this rig, it's my unicorn. It's the truck I've always wanted. And so taking these little extra steps right now, that is what's gonna make it perfect for me. Now we're pretty much done on the lift. This thing can come off the lift, and then I'm gonna focus on some interior.